Hello, Guitar Smarts fans. Before you check out this podcast, I want to make you aware of a cool new place where you can interact with other Guitar Smarts listeners. It's a Facebook group called the Guitar Geek Hangout. That's where we hang out and talk about all things guitar. So, if you like the Guitar Smarts podcast, come and chat with Kieran and myself over in the Guitar Geek Hangout on Facebook. Maybe check out some pre-podcast clips and even get involved in asking and answering lots of questions from the other page dwellers. Hope to see you there.
I bought like a bag of 200 picks off wish.com because there were like three, because, you know, I have these stupid moments where I do stuff like that. And it was like £3 or something, like for 200 of these guitar picks in my thickness, my preferred thickness, which in, I don't know, something like 0.96 or something it is, right? So just under 1 mil. So great. They've all turned up. They're all really nicely shaped. They're all really nicely finished around the edges. They are made of a material that I cannot get on with. They are like the one thing that you need a pick to do is not be like slippery. These things have got no surface friction at all.
Greetings, welcome to another episode of the Guitar Smarts podcast. Thank you very much for joining us. This week, Kieran and myself are having a good old chat about tone tips, special ways that you can improve the tone of your guitar or your rig. Now, these might not work for everyone, and some of these are through experience, but if you are a tone chaser like many of us are, and you want to always improve the sound of your rig and the sound of your guitars, then sometimes it's all in the finer details. Sometimes it's not in the big things. It's not in the expensive amp or the expensive guitar or the hand wound custom pickups. Sometimes it's in just the details of the setup of your guitar or the pick choice and things like that. And that's what we're discussing today. If you look down in the description below, you'll find links to all kinds of different things, to our social media pages. Please come along and like our social media pages and say hello. You'll find links to our Buy Me a Coffee website and also to our Etsy merchandise store where you can buy some Guitar Smarts stuff, which all helps us it helps support the show. But the best thing you can do if you want to support the show is to leave us a rating or a review in your favourite podcast app. That helps us get into the algorithm a little bit more, helps us get into the ears of other excellent guitarist and musician podcast listeners just like yourselves. Anyway, that's enough waffle from me. Let's get to it. Hey!
Yeah.
Hey, mate, it's good to see you.
It's been a while, hey? It feels like a while.
It feels like a while. It's just a couple of weeks, really, isn't it? But yeah, we need a catch up, man. We need a catch up.
I know we do. I know. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Oh, there you go. There you go. I've got all this pent up guitar nonsense in my head to talk about. It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
How have you been anyway, mate? What's new? What have you been up to the last couple of weeks?
Last couple of weeks, what have I been up to? So, a bit of work. The day job has been quite full on, but I know it has been for you as well, mate. From the messages we've been exchanging, but in a good way. I've been getting out and about now, so not so much working remotely from home and getting out and seeing people again, which has been actually quite nice. And then guitar stuff, lots of setups and stuff have been coming through, so that's been good. So I'm back up to date with that. There's nothing sitting waiting to be set up now, so that's good. I'm on top of all those, and then learning songs for some for dep gigs that I've got coming up, as well as the main band. So it's all good. It's all good, mate.
Fantastic,
and the weather's looking a bit more spring-like as well,
mate. Do you know what I've got the day off today, and for the last 2 hours this morning I've been out on the lawn cutting the grass. I've just finished scarifying and getting the moss up. After we've done this, I've got my seed and my fertilizer. I'm going to go and get some topsoil. I'm doing like my spring lawn renovation today, which is great.
Wow.
So that's my. I've got to say that's my other thing. Like, as well as guitar, lawn care as well. I love looking after my lawn.
Oh, mate, I'm all about that.
Look good, all summer stripes and
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if you just heard some rumbling in the background, but this now I feel really, really bad. But there was that was. You might have just heard outside the window. That's That's my gardener. He's just striped my lawn.
just doing everything for you. Yeah,
I know. I'm so lazy. I'm so lazy.
Let me do it.
He's a diamond. He's an absolute legend. Yeah. He's a legend. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll send you a picture of some stripes after this. We'll have a stripe off, but obviously I wouldn't look
good after today.
I won't win any points because I didn't do mine.
But at the end of today, my lawn will look like it's been torn apart because it'll be covered in topsoil. It'll be all kinds of different things. It's the renovator. But in a few weeks' time, when all that extra seed's growing and it's all thickening up after a nice fertilizer treatment, and it's starting.
You literally cannot wait for that first cut once that grass is ready, can you? Great. You are going to just be. I think you should. I can imagine you now, t-shirt and shorts, a nice cool glass of lemonade with condensation dripping down the side, just waiting for you.
Yeah.
Headphones in the ear, Rosanna at full volume.
On repeat.
On repeat. It's on constant loop. Oh, mate, that will be a good day. I love the groundwork. I love the prep that's going into this. You're playing the long game.
Yeah, I know. It's good. And yeah, like you say, the weather's been much better the last few weeks. The last couple of days, really, mostly, I think, for the last week or so. Last weekend was lovely. Yeah. Today it seems fantastic. But guitar-wise, do you know what? I'd say the last month or so, for a number of reasons, I haven't really played guitar much at all other than just to noodle around because work's been so busy that I just wanted to kind of chill out in the evenings and not really kind of, play much guitar. But I kind of know after so many years of playing guitar now, I know that it comes in waves for me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of every few months, it kind of peaks and it troughs and it peaks and it troughs, and I'm in the bottom of a trough at the moment, right down in the valley of, being kind of like, I'll just noodle around every so often. I'm not bothered about practicing too much or listening to too much music or trying to learn solos or stuff like that. I just enjoy music and pick the guitar up occasionally. And I know in a couple of months' time, I'll be back up at the top, practicing away, thinking, I can get better at this and that. So that's where I am at the moment. But I don't know. I'm kind of comfortable with it in a Zen way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in the first time for a long time, a self-awareness of knowing I don't need to be frustrated that I'm not playing guitar. It'll be fine,
It's a great thing about the guitar. It's there when you need it.
Exactly.
And it's,
all of them are there when you need them. All of them.
There's not that many.
I know. I can't help it.
I'm not buying any more guitars. After we've already chatted on the last episode, we don't need to buy any more guitars. That's it.
That was a good conversation. I really enjoyed our kind of philosophical musings on, buying guitars. I feel like we learned something about ourselves.
We did. We did. I liked what you put on the social media posts and things, which was, we learned there's different reasons that we buy guitars and which guitars we buy and for what purpose, and keeping that all in check. And it was a good conversation. And I think today's is going to be not as deep and philosophical, a bit more practical, a bit more kind of maybe some top tips. Maybe there'll be a top 10 list that comes out of it. Maybe there'll be more than 10, but at least on a similar vein, which is not necessarily feeling the need to right here and right now to go out and buy any more gear, because I think both of us have been through a bit of a gear buying phase over the last few months. You with the Head Rush and Helix rig that you've moved over to, myself with new pedal board stuff and kind of guitars and stuff for gigging. So I'm kind of in like your peaks and troughs kind of description of guitar playing. I'm kind of in a nice comfortable trough with buying anything at the moment. I'm not feeling the need to buy anything, but today we thought we'd talk about some kind of just little tips and things to get more oomph out of what you've already got, to get squeeze more out of what gear you've already got and make sure you're doing the maximum with your kit, rather than just going, I don't like my sound, I need a new pedal. I don't like my guitar sound, I need to put some new pickups in. Expensive stuff like that. What else can we do before we go and purchase something else?
Yeah.
Are we getting too mature and too boring?
No.
With that?
No. No, not at all. Not in the slightest. I think this is a really important conversation, right? Because I think there's kind of like a life cycle for guitarists when it comes to this kind of thing. I think it takes a good 5-6 years, maybe more, maybe less for some guitarists. I think when you start learning guitar and you get better and better and you get to a point where you're playing with other people and maybe you're playing live and stuff like that. It doesn't, the tone conversation doesn't start till quite late on, Do you know what I mean? It's kind of...
I do.
It's kind of like, all or nothing when you first start. It's kind of, you get a multi-effects system and suddenly, everything is on, all the effects, and everything sounds terrible, but to you it sounds fantastic at that time. Because
you haven't had those things before, right? And now you've got access to them. So surely if I put them all on my sound will be a magnitude greater than it was before. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was, whilst thinking about this, I was wondering, what is it about tone and improving tone? Because we're asking this question, or at least what we're saying to our listeners is these are ways that we can improve. These are ways you should think to improve your tone. And it got me thinking, are there objective and subjective things that affect your tone? Like, do you know what I mean? Because I don't think I'd like to play guitar through like a Roland jazz chorus with a Boss heavy metal 2 pedal plugged into it. And so I probably wouldn't like that tone, but that's entirely subjective because that tone might fit in really well with a particular mix or sound. Somebody might like it in some kind of weird, acid jazz house song or something like that. Some things about tone are really just subjective and not objective, and some things I think are objective. Have I jumped in at the deep end here?
No, you totally have. I know, but I love the way that you have, because that is like the perfect disclaimer or kind of just like advice before we get into any of these things, right? And because you're absolutely right. Elements of what we as guitarists, you and I, guitarists in general, believe will tweak and improve their tone is, I was going to say in the eyes of the beholder, but in this case, it's on the ears of the listener, right? It is subjective, right? So you've got to do what you feel is right. I mean, I'm really into kind of hi-fi music and audiophile kind of hi-fi gear as well. And, particularly in that industry, even more so as a punter, there is so much, snake oil kind of products being peddled to, tweak out that extra little bit of fidelity or sound staging or whatever it is from your gear. And you get to the point where you go, really? Is it really going to make the biggest difference? Like, if I spend another £1,000 on a piece of speaker cable, I mean, it gets into silly realms. So, and if we bring that back to guitar, there's definitely, people that will wax lyrical about, biasing a valve at a certain kind of set point to tweak out an extra bit of, tone from it. And then you start to get into, I think, really subjective bits of discussion, exactly as you say. So maybe that's a good thing to keep us grounded as we go through these kind of things that we think are going to improve tone, because I think, we haven't really compared notes or anything up until this point, but I've put together a rough list of things that I think people should look at first, just to make sure they're doing the best they can with their gear. And I think, generally speaking, most of what I've got on this list is pretty much objective stuff. I don't think it's any of it is too subjective. There is definitely bits of it which are experiment and see what sounds best to you. But the steps I'm asking people to consider, I think, will create big enough differences in tone for them to say, I like it versus what I had before, or I don't like it, so I'll go back to how I was doing it before. Does that make sense?
It completely makes sense. I mean, it's horses for courses, isn't it? As we'd say, I mean, I don't want to get caught up too much on that philosophical point of, what is tone? Why are we as guitarists so obsessed with our tone when how much music do you listen to? It's just guitar. It's the thing I love about music is the mix. And some guitar tones in context sound terrible by themselves.
Yeah.
So this is why I find it kind of, I mean, I think a lot of guitarists run the risk of being quite narcissistic when it comes to their own tone, very protective of their own tone, and you know, they never really think about the context of it. But I think that might be a conversation for another day. I think today, let's just talk about the things which I think and you think are really great points to consider if you want to improve, or maybe just experiment with in trying to improve and see if you can, you know, find more enjoyment out of your guitar tone.
That's it.
I think those are the things we need to do. So, Kieran, I'm gonna leave it to you to start with with kind of your number one choice. Or not necessarily, actually, no, this shouldn't be in any particular order, should it? It should just be a conversation piece, do you think, on?
Yeah, well, let's see where it goes. I put I put a list down, right? I'm sure you've done a list as well. And coincidentally, the thing that is on the top of my list, I think, is probably the most important thing. But I won't go into it in too much detail because I think it'll be pretty obvious to our listeners. And we've covered it in much better detail in other podcast episodes.
Sorry to interrupt this super fascinating conversation about getting the most out of your guitar, but if you've listened this far, then you probably should subscribe to the Guitar Smarts podcast. So do that now and then come straight back.
So the first thing, right, I think, in terms of getting better tone, is to be comfortable on the instrument that you're trying to get that better tone out of, right? It sounds obvious, and it sounds like a bit of a tangential link to what we're talking about, but it's really not. And it is about.
It's not a pedal. You mean you're not?
It's not a pedal.
I thought you were going to just say buy this pedal or something, or you know. That's it. Speak to Joe Bonamassa and see what he's doing for tone these days. I didn't realise it was going to be something you had to think about.
Something as simple as just make sure that the guitar that you're playing is properly set up. Because I mean, honestly, mate, and we've chatted about this, haven't we? Right? You know, the temptation to go and buy the latest MXR pedal that's labelled better tone, and you press a button and then you go, that's it, I've got my better tone now. Yes, box ticked.
Yeah.
Okay, it was not as simple as that. And Bonamassa, bloody Bonamassa, love him, amazing player. But seriously, I mean, the amount of people that he's probably inspired or that to go and get some like ludicrously expensive vintage instrument, because that is the way forward and how to make you sound as good as he sounds, which is incredible. You know, it's just it's simpler than that, folks. Just make sure your guitar is set up in the best possible way it can, because if it's set up properly to play as best as it can for you, you will lose yourself in that instrument and your tone will start to improve because you're more inspired to play, you're more comfortable playing. It will just, it will stop you fighting against the instrument and ultimately fighting against getting that tone that you want. But as I said, I'm not going to go into the details of how to set up your guitar, because we've covered that in the guitar setup episodes that we've done previously. But first and foremost, start there, because there's no point being unhappy with your sound if you've got a duff old set of strings on your guitar. The intonation's out and you know it's out, so you're ignoring it. Your frets are choking out, and the whole thing just needs some love and care. Why even start to try to improve your tone if the initial thing, which is your fingers on that instrument, ain't happening in the right way. Done.
I couldn't agree more. That was absolutely top of my list too, mate. Just like, simple things that could really affect your sound, like pickup height, stuff like that even if you're happy with it now, experiment with it, you might get happier with it. And, string gauge and stuff like, choices that you make as part of your, the setup of your guitar can really affect. It might not affect the sound too much, but like you said, I guess it's an indirect thing, isn't it? If you're more comfortable with your instrument, you're going to perform better. That's going to feed into the sound of your instrument, and the sound of how you play. So much of the sound of the guitar comes from the fingers, as people rightly say. I think you hear that quite a lot. Oh, it's all in the fingers. It's not all in the fingers, but a huge amount of it is in the fingers for sure. So why not make yourself as comfortable as possible with your instrument? I think that's a fantastic point.
I like the fact you mentioned pickup height there as well, because that is a really overlooked one. And again, we've covered it in other episodes, but just as a reminder to folk, if you really do want to start, if your guitar is set up as comfortably as you want it to be, and you feel, this is really nicely set up, and either you've done it yourself, following some of the advice we've given on the show, or you've taken it to a tech or a luthier and they've done it for you, great. But pickup height, again, is definitely one of those kind of subjective things that you can really experiment with and play with, because even if the tech or it's left the factory like that, has set the pickups up against the kind of string in a relative way that is either in line with the manufacturer's recommendations, either the guitar manufacturer or the pickup manufacturer or whatever. You can play around with that so much, and there is no real right or wrong. I mean, there is a wrong insofar as I said there's no right or wrong, and then I'm going to tell you there is a wrong, which I mean, the wrong is basically an obvious one, which is if you wind the pickups up so high relative to the string that they then start to interfere with the travel of the string, and you'll hear that as those kind of weird harmonic overtones. Or, even worse, it starts to, interfere with the mechanical action of the string when you play up at the higher frets, then clearly that's wrong. But anything up to that point, play with it. It will make a huge difference to the sound of your guitar. And, that initial kind of instinct we have when we're really beginner players or something, which is, well, I just need to wind my pickups up as high as I can to the underside of the string, because that gives me a higher output, and that must be a better, fuller, richer tone. That's not the correct way of thinking. A lot of players like to floor their pickups right down to the scratch plate and drive the amp harder. And yes, the pickups will sound thinner with less output, but then when you compensate that with the amp at a higher volume, all of a sudden you start to dial in sounds that you didn't think you could get from that guitar. So it's really, really worth playing with the pickup heights.
Wow, it's quite complex, really, isn't it? Because obviously there's a physical understanding of what's going on, isn't there, as well? I guess even the which pickups to actually raise and lower. Your neck pickups obviously are going to get closer to the string sooner, because the string vibrates further around that area of the whereas the bridge, the string's not vibrating as it's not traveling as far, like you say. So I think that's a really good thing to do. I think go and kind of experiment with pickup height and see how that affects the sound of your rig.
And again, it's there is no right or wrong. So I would generally say, like, okay, let's for example say you've got a 3 pickup guitar like a Strat. I would generally start by saying, get the neck pickup sounding how you want it to, right? And experiment with the height of the neck pickup first. Then, once you've got that dialed in, how you want it to sound, then you've got a couple of options, right? Which is the other 2 pickups. What do you want to do with them? Do you want to make it a really nice balanced output, so no matter what position you flick your selector switch to, you've got a comparable volume output, knowing and appreciating that your out of phase kind of positions of 2 and 4 will always have a slight volume drop in them anyway, and learning to understand and live with that? Or do you want to raise those pickups in a different way, so that as you flick through them, you get different volumes for different songs or different ways of cutting through the mix? There is no right and wrong. You can play with that to your heart's content. It's up to you what you want to do with it. Anyway, I think we've kind of covered pickup height, but it's a whole thing that's just so overlooked.
I think so too, and I think maybe we should jump to string gauge as well.
Okay, yeah.
I think it follows nicely from pickup height. We're talking about guitar setup, and string gauge is also something I've been experimenting with. Actually, string gauge and material choice over the last year or so. Our listeners probably remember us talking about it probably a couple of times on previous podcasts, but I've been astounded over the last year at how different my guitars can sound with different string materials. But but I'm also relatively convinced that string gauge is less important, except for the feel of the instrument. Maybe not so the sound. I remember watching a video by Rhett Shull on YouTube who was talking about you're trying different string gauges, and he went down to 9s and I think 8s maybe. And in an experiment he did, he realised, listening back to the recordings, that really the string gauge hadn't made the difference to his sound that he thought it might have done. And that actually in some cases he thinks that he may be more comfortable as a guitarist if he reduces his string gauge, now that he felt confident that it doesn't affect his sound so much. But there are some guitarists out there like Josh Smith, who I'm a big fan of, who's a fantastic blues guitarist, who he uses 13s on everything and still tunes to standard tuning.
Good Lord.
Which is like, that's just madness to me. That's like having, that's like having your G string as the E string, isn't it? Pretty much tuning up like that in some cases. But his argument for that is to do with volume. And he's saying that, there is literally more mass to the string than there is with a smaller gauge string. So he's learned to deal with and acclimatize himself to the energy he has to exert on the string to bend or to even just fret the string. And he's got used to that and is strong enough to do it. And his argument is that, well, I now have higher headroom. I can now, get more signal strength out of my guitar. I have a bigger sound because of that. Well, you're not also a big Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, and Stevie Ray Vaughan was, I don't know if it's truth or not, but people talk about him having ridiculous gauge strings. I'm more skeptical. I think I prefer comfort over tone, actually, when it comes to string gauge. 10s are perfect for me. I don't think I'd go lower than 10s, but I've tried 9s before. I've on my Les Paul, felt great. But for me, the material choices that's where there's a lot of fun to be found in experimenting with the tone of your guitar, is playing with the different materials that are available, and also the different manufacturers. I really like pure nickel strings on my guitars now because of there's definitely more warmth. There's definitely a darker sound, and I think that really helps to refine the sound of my instruments, which aren't particularly high-end instruments. But I've tried, Ernie Ball, Fender, Kurt Mangan, all the different types of pure nickel strings, and they all sound different too. It's bizarre how much fun there is to be had in experimenting with different string materials and different manufacturers to see how it can affect the tone of your instrument. You might find, if you're trying to get a warmer sound out of your guitar, one of the things that people might do is they cut the treble on the amp or on a effects pedal or an EQ pedal or something like that, which is great, but that's literally subtractive equalization. That's taking signal away. So that's literally throwing something away that your guitar's doing. So why not just think about EQ differently and think about how you can change the sound of your instrument so you don't have to subtract signal away to make your guitar sound better? Why not have, if you want your guitar to sound darker, get some strings that sound darker and then have your EQ a bit more flat, and then you've got more signal because you're not subtracting signal with your EQ. All EQ is really is volume control for certain frequency ranges. So that's something that I've learned about my guitar tone over the last year or two, which is to think differently about how, string gauge is part of that. String gauge and string material help me think differently about how I EQ my sound.
Exactly. And I would always say play the heaviest strings you can that feel comfortable, and at the moment it starts to feel uncomfortable or that you're fighting against it in a way that you don't want to, then drop down. And it's the reason I still go with 9s on a Strat. I find it really comfortable to play on it, and allows me to still get a decent tone out of it. But and 10s for me works great on a Les Paul. But I also know that and this may be part of the thing with incredible musicians like Josh Smith that you've mentioned, which is your hands will invariably get stronger the more you play and the more you kind of use heavier strings as well. So it may just be that he just doesn't find it a fight on 13s in the same way that you and I would. So to him, that works. Bonamassa does something interesting. He's not unique in the way that he does it. A lot of players do this, where he overwraps the strings around the tailpiece. But that allows him to play a heavier gauge of string because of the way in which it changes the break angle of the string across the bridge and the saddle. It invariably also makes that thicker gauge string feel slinkier and lighter than it actually is. So that's one of his reasons that he gets around using a heavier gauge string, or how he gets around using a heavier gauge string, but still makes it comfortable to play. So again, that links back to there might even be ways to use heavier strings on your guitar, but make it feel lighter just in the way the guitar's set up and the way the strings are strung. But yeah, I think we've probably covered enough on that. But play with different strings, right? Gauges, materials. I just improved my acoustic the other day just by trying a different brand and type of material of the string. I was like, oh yeah, I like this guitar again. I like it again now.
That's literally transformative. Just changing the string type.
Yeah, I was shopping for a new acoustic guitar because I just remembered that guitar sounding better, and then I remembered, oh yeah, I used to use phosphor bronze from this manufacturer, and I haven't used those for years on that. I'll put them back on. Oh, there you go.
There you go.
There's my guitar.
Back to life.
Don't need to buy a new acoustic.
Wow. So you can buy something else instead. You can buy another pedal, or
well, you could put your money somewhere else on the signal chain. Right. Where else? Let's spend some money. Let's stop talking about stuff.
Actually, let's do that. I was just going to say,
let's spend some money.
Let's go to something in the list which involves us, splashing a bit of cash.
Yeah, a little bit. We're in the context of today. No, at no point are we going to say go out and buy a new guitar or buy a new amp. But there are bits where we should say spend a bit more money than £5 on a new set of strings, because that's I think people know that. Right. So where would you spend some money in a non-significant way to make a big difference?
Where would I spend some money in a non-significant way to make some difference? That's a fantastic question. Genuinely,
I just realised I've asked you because you don't like spending money on anything.
Well, that's true. Well, I like spending money on the right things. It's the bigger purchases that it's the big things. But let's put it this way: if I just reset up my guitar and it sounded and it felt great, and maybe I'd got myself a nice little snake oil pedal to make my make my sound even better. I don't know. Let's say I just bought a Klon or something like that. I stuck it on the floor, and I've got a fantastic, like a vintage Marshall or Fender amp behind me. Like, this is brilliant tone. If I'm connecting that stuff with really cheap, £2 cable bin pedals from Guitar Shop, if I'm connecting that stuff together with pedals, with terrible cables and using terrible power supplies, then it becomes redundant. It becomes a pointless endeavor trying to get good tone. So I think an investment in good interconnects and good power supplies and things like that, that's where that's where a huge amount of tone can be really realized, don't you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's exactly where I'd spend the next bit of money, and it doesn't have to be stupidly expensive cables, gold plated this and that, and get decent kind of Neutrik jack pedals that are well made. I like the True Tone stuff. They're really, really. I think you turned me on to that, and I've recommended it.
True Tone or Clear Tone?
Clear Tone. Sorry, Clear Tone.
No, you're right. I can't remember. It's a company in Basingstoke in the UK, I think, called Award Session, that have been around for a long time.
That's right.
A gentleman called Stuart Ward and obviously this isn't sponsored or anything like that, but I'm speaking out of my experience, and this company will custom make cables to order of any type. It doesn't have to be guitar instrument cables. It can be, they'll do speaker cables and microphone cables and anything like that. They'll custom make them to order. They're really, really cost effective.
Yeah, they're a bit more expensive than your normal, off the shelf stuff, but they're not. I wouldn't say they're expensive. They're reasonably priced.
They're more expensive than, say, your Stag or your Anderton's own brand. They're not more expensive than like your Klotz cables, or they're certainly not more expensive than like Ernie Ball cables and stuff that you see in the shops. They're an average price. If you're willing to go to a guitar store and buy and spend 20 quid on a decent, say 4.5 meter guitar cable, that's how much you probably spend with this guy. But he will hand make it and ship it to you to order. And I've got cables in my gig bag which I've had from him for maybe 10 years that I've never once had to repair or had any kind of problems with. It's just things like that make all the difference.
I've just gone onto the website now, mate. Same. You turned me onto these, and that was probably 10 years ago, and I bought a bunch, and I'm still gigging them to this day. Not one patch cable, not one kind of guitar lead has failed in that time. And I absolutely, going back to your objective and subjective kind of improvements in tone, I absolutely am convinced that when I switched to these cables, it made a noticeable difference in the transparency and kind of authentic nature of my guitar, and it just worked. And I thought, that's it, perfect. That's that part of the signal chain sorted. It's awardsession.com. And it's the yellow tab custom cables.
Yellow tab custom cables are fantastic. I mean, he only uses the professional Neutrik connectors, doesn't use because the Neutrik do a number of different types of connectors, and he only uses the pro ones. He uses Van Damme cable, instrument cable. So it's all good stuff. And he manufactures them really well. In fact, the last time when I got the Helix, I ordered a couple more cables from them so that I had a couple more cables to go, so I could go out to, I had more spare cables basically for it, because the setup demanded a few more cables. And I went online and I ordered 2 more 6 meter jack to jack instrument cables. And I missed that there was a deal on at the time, that you had to press a particular button and there was a deal. And I paid, and they emailed me back saying, you missed a deal on the website. So we'll cancel it and we'll charge you the deal price. So they were even nice enough to kind of say, hey, don't pay this much. You missed out on this deal. What? So we'll just give you this. There's that kind of service you get. You don't get that from
anywhere. Right. They're definitely getting a plug off this podcast and a call out in the social media.
That's why I like companies like that, because that they're people, really. They're people. It's the man in the shed who's doing amazing work, and needs a bit of support and needs people to know about their product. And they do nice things like that. Yeah,
and they're great cables, and you and I have both used them for years. I've recommended them to other musicians who've said to me, love those. They sound great. I'm using those. So and great customer service. Amazing. But back to the point in hand, which is spend some money on decent cables. But
spend some money on decent cables. It's what's the point in having nice things? It's like having a Ferrari and putting cheap petrol in it. You wouldn't put you put the decent stuff in it. It's the same as that. Next.
Love it. Right, where do we go from here? Well, let's continue to spend a bit more money. Let's ratchet up a little bit. Where do we want to go next? Well, I think we've spoken a lot. I had one next on my list, which was put a buffer pedal on your board if you need it, and don't be lured into all true bypass pedals. And do you know what? I think we've covered this quite nicely in our whole pedal board episode, didn't we? As to why a buffer would make sense and why that's necessary. But if you're running a pedal board like a more traditional one with a whole bunch of true bypass pedals on it, yeah, consider getting a buffered pedal somewhere along the line just to boost again your tone through that board. So I think we've covered that one. This is the one that I want to go to next, which can involve spending a bit of money, but can also just involve appreciating how sound reproduction works in a room and playing with the tools that are already on it. And this bit is where I think I can learn a bit more wisdom from you. And this is around dialing in your amp, right? How often as guitar players do we get an amp and we either look at the recommended settings on the internet or by the manufacturer, and we try those and we go, yeah, it's all right. Then we find our own nice settings at home, and then we go, okay, I've got the right sound that I want. Then we go out and put it in a different room, in a live setting, at different volumes, and then we kind of go, oh, I'm not sure that the sound's working for me. So I think one of the simplest disciplines to get into is really being flexible and constantly thinking about how you're dialing in your amp based on where you're playing, how loud you're playing, what type of sound you're trying to get in the mix with your band. And I think there's some tips that we can learn from you, Matt, because you really understand about, EQ and live sound reproduction as to what that looks like for as a starter, where people should start trying to get the best out of their amp with the EQ controls and things to dial it in a better way and ultimately get, a tone that they didn't think was possible or from that amp.
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic point. I mean, being able to dial your amp in is absolutely paramount to your guitar sound. Two things I'll talk about. One is we mentioned earlier on about understanding how your guitar sound fits into the context of the mix, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess you could as a guitarist, you could put some effort into learning about really where things sit in the frequency range. So it's quite tough for guitarists to actually stick out in a mix because that area of the frequency spectrum is quite congested in a band mix. The bass player's not really competing with anyone. The drummer's not really competing with anyone. Everything for a drummer is quite transient. It's not really long tones that are being stretched out like guitars and keys. And keys is difficult because it covers the entire spectrum. I mean, the lowest note on a keyboard, I think, is down at, like 80 hertz, something like that. And you're going all the way up in multiple octaves, right up to the high frequencies. So for guitars, we're really competing with vocals, and vocals should be at the front of the mix. So how do you cut through a mix if you're a guitarist then? You have to really think about, your context of the entire mix and try and dial in your tone to be what you want it to be, but also cut through, And the other thing to think about is power. If you put in too much bass, I like my guitar sound to be quite bass. I've always liked that kind of thumping sound that you get from a neck pickup on a Strat. You know what I mean?
I do.
But bass frequencies take up a lot of power. That's why people talk about guitars sounding a bit woofy, when there's too much low end. Yeah. Exactly. Bass frequencies can sap all the power out of the power amp if you've got too much going through. And that can really cause problems in the mix. Then your guitar sound gets lost. So sometimes it's better to sacrifice a lot of low end and have your guitar cut through better and just kind of have faith that the bass player and, everything, your sound engineer's got the low end of the, mix covered.
Or your bass player is just being covered by the bass player, in the mix and you don't need to stress about trying to compete.
Absolutely. And I would also recommend, if you've got the room and you really need that sound, and you really want your guitar to cut through with low end as well as mids, then consider a dual guitar amp rig and have one amp that's really managing the low end and another amp that's really managing the mids and the upper mids. That's going to, you're not going to end up with an amp that's kind of, woofing out a little bit because it's trying to do everything. You're sharing that responsibility between two amplifiers. So, but the other thing I wanted to mention is, and this is something that, excuse me, this is something I heard Matt Schofield talk about years ago. And it was a tip that he had, and I've seen this in a number of magazines over the years, and it's definitely Matt Schofield's thing that he said. and it was advice he gave for dialing in an amp. The question came from the fact that for guitarists like Matt Schofield, who's, you know, a very well-renowned artist in an industry that isn't so, you know, and certainly in a genre that isn't so kind of like, you're not doing arena gigs, you're not doing tour, you're not doing like, you know, you're not Joe Bonamassa at least, but you're still touring a lot and you're still flying around to gigs, but you can't probably take your amp with you everywhere you go. You're reliant on an amp that you don't know anything about when you get there, and how do you dial that amp in? And he had a really great point, which was, for any guitar amp, really, any control, whether it's the master volume, the gain, the EQs, presence, or anything like that, every control tends to have, you know, a point on that on its travel where you suddenly really hear the effect of it. Right?
I've heard this. Yeah.
And his tip is to find that point for everything and set it there, so that you've got the amp right on, so everything's right on the edge of where it's kind of really functioning the best. And he said he finds that is always the best way to get the most satisfying, kind of clean, fundamental tone out of any amplifier. I've tried that a number of times as well, and actually I think it's a really great way to kind of initially set your tone on your amp. So those are the two things I would say about dialing in your amp is consider the context of your sound, and also, you know, try and, if you're dialing in an amp for the first time or you don't really know how to get that kind of in it, if you use your amp like a clean bass, do the Matt Schofield trick. That's probably the way to
So it's about finding that sweet spot, isn't it, on each of those bass, middle and treble pots, where, as you say, it goes from, I'm not sure it's really doing anything, not sure it's really doing anything, and then, all of a sudden, it's really making a difference. Now I can hear it, hear that pot kicking in. And that, if you follow that kind of mentality, that's the sweet spot there. Just in that little bit of play where it starts to become noticeable. Try setting everything there first of all, rather than the inherent mentality, I guess, which is, again, another one to try, which is just set everything at 12 o'clock and then work around there. The sweet spot might not be 12 o'clock. So just see. Well,
that's right. You know, some amplifiers, like, for example, and I'm sure our listeners will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, for example, an old Vox AC30, it's not a plus or minus tone control on some of those amps, or maybe the old Tweed amps where you just had a tone control. Those were, you know, the flat doing nothing position is all the way down. Right. And then as you kind of introduce more travel into the knob, it's doing like a cut. It's doing like a low cut. So it feels like I'm introducing high end, but all I'm doing is taking away low end, really. And so if you understand more about what your amp actually does, any amp that has an instruction manual will tell you this. It'll tell you how the tone controls work. It'll say, you know, the flat position is at 12 o'clock or whatever. Some amps don't work that way. So understand that part about your equipment as well.
Yeah, nice. I think that's really good advice, mate. Particularly around the bass. Be cautious around, you know, the sound that you get at home with where the bass tone control is positioned, and then that might not work in a live setting. Oftentimes, it can actually make your guitar sound too muddy. Tame the bass, to roll that off a little bit. Think about the mids, pushing those a little bit more in a live context, so that it doesn't compete with the vocals, but it just cuts through nicely. I mean, it's the basis of why a Tube Screamer is such a popular pedal, right? Because it has that bass roll off and that mid hump, which all of a sudden you kick it on and people just go, "Oh, my guitar sounds really good." You go,
exactly it, right?
You've just EQ'd your guitar properly and added a little bit of dirt to it.
It's not just gain. It's not just gain. It's not just a Stevie Ray Vaughan thing. It's not just level into your amp. You're absolutely correct. It's a tone shaping that it does, which is it rolls low end off and it boosts the mids. Those are the things. That's where the guitar exists, in the mid range. You know, the electric guitar tonally it exists in the mid range. So if you want to cut through, boost the mids, get rid of the low end. So there we go.
That's it. What's the other thing I would say, if you do want to spend a bit of money on the amp, if you've tried all those things that you've suggested and is last bit of, well, one bit to spend money and one bit to just, again, try before you spend some money. Positioning of your amp, right? I know this is often very limited by the venues that we play in. Oftentimes your amp's teetering precariously on the edge of a bar table or on a chair that you've got, or propped up. All of that is gonna have an influence, right? Stuffed in the corner of a room versus brought more into the room. All of those things are going to have a bearing on it, right? So just consider that. This is basic speaker kind of principles, right? But if you bring a speaker more up to ear volume, you're going to hear the treble bits a little bit more because it's going to be more on axis to the listener, and so it could sound harsher. But then try and control that with the treble. If you push it into the corner of a room with not a lot of space, it's going to reinforce some of those bass frequencies a little bit, which could make it sound a bit muddier. So just kind of watch out for those kind of things. So just have a think about where your amp is placed in a room, and if that's the right positioning for you. And if you can't move where the amp is positioned, then think about, okay, what has that position done to the inherent way in which sound is going to come out of my amp and be reflected around the room? Should I roll off the bass a bit more than I normally would because it's wedged right up into a corner and the air is just not moving around it in a way that can disperse that bass? Or is it raised up quite high now so it's hitting people directly in the face? Do I need to control the treble a little bit more? So that's one thing around, think about where your amp is. And then the other thing to spend some money on, which I wholeheartedly can endorse as a cheap thing, is try different speakers in your amp. If you're not competent or comfortable doing it, messing around with amps with the kind of voltages and things they can retain even when they're off, then get a tech to do it. But speakers are relatively inexpensive things to chuck in, and will make a huge difference to sometimes the cheaper stock speakers that are used in a lot of kind of mid-range amps. You can take an amp from an amp that you thought it doesn't really sound as good as I like, or it's a bit too harsh, to one that you fall in love with just by changing the speakers in it.
You've got experience of that, haven't you, with your amp? Is that right?
I have, and quite a lot of people recommend doing this to the Blues Deluxe or any of those hot rod amps. They're great amps. The clean channel is brilliant for taking pedals. They've got a nice amount of headroom for kind of most venues. And they're a decent enough size to not be completely, impractical to lug around. So for a jobbing guitarist, the kind of hot rod deluxe, Blues Deluxe amps are great. But it's often cited that the stock eminent speakers that they put in them are quite harsh at higher volumes. And so I did a very relatively inexpensive mod and put in a Cannabis Rex speaker into it to replace the stock one, and it was like a night and day transformation. Everything that I didn't like about some of the tonal characteristics was removed, and that wasn't, again, a subjective thing. That was really clearly evident in the end product, and it's made that amp everything I want it to be now. But people do it to Blues Juniors. It's really easy to do. It's just an easy thing to kind of to play around with and experiment with. So yeah.
And if you've got Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, if you've got a desire to spend some money, then you can do it without kind of killing yourself. Like 50, 60 bucks,
That's
50, 60 quid on a new speaker, and it's like, it's fine.
Surprising how cheap a decent speaker upgrade can be, especially if you're willing to do the work yourself. One thing I would say is always just check, from an electrical point of view, check you're not buying a speaker with a different impedance to the speaker you're taking out. You don't want to then, you can blow your amplifier quite easily if you put the wrong impedance speaker into an amplifier. If an amp wants to see 4 or if maybe your amp wants to see 8 or 16 ohms, you put something 4 ohms in, that's not enough impedance. That can make your amp overheat and overwork. So just be careful you're not doing something that isn't like for like in terms of its electrical capabilities. But yeah, speaker upgrade is a fantastic thing to do. Something I've never done actually. But now I've got the Helix, I can do it at the press of a button, Kieran. If I want to do it through if I want my sound to have a 4x12 Celestion greenback, or like a 1x10 Supro cabinet, I can. I can do it. And it doesn't cost me anything. It's just, I can just turn a little wheel.
It's there, and it's done, and it's done.
There we go.
Oh, you're going to get me down the helix route, aren't you? Do you know? I'm already kind of taking a step forward there, right? Because I need an active wedge for the band that I'm playing in, and just to have a nice little bit of fold back. And I thought, well, I could buy just this, or I could buy that. I thought I did end up buying one of those alto speakers, which is very similar in spec to the Head Rush that you've got. And the reason why I bought it is massively overkill for a bit of foldback in terms of wattage, just to hear my vocals for a bit and maybe a little bit of guitar going through it. But I bought it thinking, if I go down the helix route, then this will be ready for that. So I've already started watching the videos on YouTube.
Stop
tempting myself.
Denying yourself. Stop denying yourself. You're living.
No,
you're living a hypocritical situation there. I think.
I really am. So who knows? Tune in next week to find out if Kieran actually went down the helix and sold everything. No, he won't. I'll never sell everything. And I'm going to keep with the rig that I've got for the moment. But I am intrigued. I am intrigued by this helix.
Well, do you know what? Actually, I should mention. I know we've got listeners who use modelling gear for their gigging setup, but I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to mention some tips.
Good shout.
If you want to improve your tone whilst you don't have a more traditional setup of amps, pedals, and and all that stuff. If you, like me, have accepted what the future holds for us and have moved forward into that realm rather than, it's
stuck in the dark ages like me.
It can be really difficult to know whether you've dialed in a good tone or not. More difficult, I would say, than if you're using a more traditional setup. But what I would say is there's some really great things you can do. Go online, go on YouTube, find a couple of guys, one called Steve Sterlacci, one called Rhett Shull. We know Rhett Shull, he's quite a big YouTube guy. They've both done some great videos on how to dial in your tone from a modelling perspective for live use, and there's some really excellent tips there to do with gain staging, to do with EQ. Generally, your modelling system will have a flat EQ across the board, but really a normal guitar amp will really actually only kind of work from about like 200 hertz up to about a 10k, something like that. So use a global EQ to kind of get rid of all that. And what that does actually, it helps to get rid of a lot of like high end digital artifacts that can happen in processing. It really helps to kind of hone your tone down a little bit better within the processing that happens.
So where do you use that EQing?
So that's like a global EQ. So with most of your, whether it's a Kemper or a Helix or any of these things, you'll have a global EQ that's separate to the patches or the tone or anything you would put in your signal chain. It's like a global setting, and you can use that to reduce the frequency range of the system itself to be more like a natural setup. And then things like putting a compressor at the end of your signal chain was a great tip Rhett Shull put in, because he said that kind of helps to simulate the more natural compression that happens in the power amp stage of a guitar amp. Even though that's something that might have been modelled, it can also help to level off things like delay repeats and things like that in the same way a guitar amp might help with that. So go and watch some of those videos and have a listen, and they'll really make a difference if you use a model.
Was there anything for you that was like sorry to put you on the spot, was there anything for you that was like a light bulb moment or just a kind of reminder when you moved over to the Helix and you were setting it up and working through patches where you just kind of went, okay, this is how I need to do it now, and that making that transition over to the fully digital rig where you went, okay, that's different to how I've done things with the more traditional rig, and that's making a much better kind of choice for this type of setup to get a better sound.
I'd definitely say understanding gain staging and the global EQ thing was transformative for me. You've got you're giving your sound engineer more work to do when you go over to a modeling setup that where you're just using the modeler to do everything. You're not using it as part of another guitar amp or anything like that. Some guys might use a HX stomp as just a pedal on the chain rather than as the actual origin of the guitar sound. So you've got to try and think about how you can make that modeler sound like a mic'd up amplifier as much as possible. But EQing, definitely thinking about your gain staging, making sure your patches, your different tones for like where volume increases or decrease, whether you're going from a clean to a crunch to a heavy to a lead sound. I found it harder to get the difference in volume between those things to work right in a live situation than with a more traditional setup. So
yes,
one of the things I'll say, it's going to take you 3 or 4 gigs before you get it right. So plan to have a few gigs that you're going to be not 100% happy with, but from when you sat at home with headphones on listening to these things, you kind of like, it sounds incredible. There's no way it's going to sound bad at a gig. But the things that you're going to struggle with is your gain staging. That's going to take some time to get right.
And when you say gain staging, right, I mean, in my mind, that is the kind of way in which you can stack different gains, overdrives, distortions to then be additive or subtractive in the tone you're trying to create, right? And the way I would do that on my traditional pedal board is to have my lower gain almost mild drive pedals first, and then get progressively more distorted, 3 or 4 different pedals doing that. To the point where I can create the most saturated, most dirty sound that I want in a controlled way by layering these pedals. So in terms of, that's a similar principle from my recollection to how I used to do things on my Line 6. But is there something I've forgotten, or is there a different way to doing that in the Helix that you would say
it's still the same. If you're trying to achieve a fundamental tone of those different sounds, clean, crunchy, more or less crunchy, all those things that you would do by standing on different pedals. What I would say is that although the Helix makes them sound just as fantastic as a more traditional setup to my ears, the difference is the experience in the room. A guitar amp, when you if I think about how I used to have my guitar amp set up, I might have a clean to crunchy sound at the amp. I might have like a crunch pedal to give me just a heavier crunch rhythm sound. I might have a boost before it to get more gain. I might have a boost after it to get more volume. I could set my Helix up to do exactly the same thing, and in my headphones it'll sound the same, but at the gig, the difference is in the perceived volume between those different things.
Yes.
So the sound is kind of the same, but the perceived volume is not necessarily going to work the same way. If I want that volume boost after my gain pedal for like a lead tone, using an amp, I can step on that pedal and bam, I've got 10, 15 dB more volume. That's a lot more power. I can have the settings the same on my Helix and it feels like there's no volume increase at all. So there's work to be done in making sure you're set up so that you're allowing those volume increases to happen. If you've got your fundamental tone too loud already, you've got nowhere to go, even though you get that same creamy, awesome tone when you stand on it. And it's hard to figure that out at home with headphones on.
It is. It is. Yeah.
So that's what I mean. Is work hard to kind of make sure you're level setting. That's the hardest part about it. It's level setting.
And I'm still tweaking that on my more traditional pedal board in a live setting. But I must say, I found it more difficult to do on my Line 6 pod in a live setting, and there was many gigs spent adjusting the volume of those different patches as you're gain staging with different bits of distortion pedal kicking in. I can generally have it nailed within the first couple of songs on on a gig with a more traditional pedal board. I don't know whether it just feels easier because it's just easier to just quickly turn a knob on a pedal where the knob is already there versus going in and programming something slightly different on the Helix. I don't know how easy it is to change that on a Helix versus how it was on the Pod. But,
yeah, it's super easy. I mean, you literally just, you can just like tap, if you've got a pedal, put it this way, if you, on a Helix, for example, if you've got a pedal that you've assigned to be, say, a tube screamer in your thing, if you just tap the pedal, not turn it on or off, you just touch it. On a Helix, it recognizes that touch as like a capacitive touch. All your foot pedals on a Helix are kind of capacitive as well as mechanical. So without turning your tube screamer on, you can just tap the pedal and then all the controls for the tube screamer are available on the screen as if it's there. So it's not really any different to just having the pedal in front of you.
Nice.
It's so great. It's so user friendly. It's the thing that Line 6.
I'm going to have to come round and have a demo of it.
Yeah, I need to kind of get it in front of you. This is the biggest thing that Line 6 did. It's not just the sounds, it's the usability of the device itself. It's so easy to use. And like I said, there's things about it that allow you to kind of think differently as to how you manipulate your tone. But anyway, that we're almost on the verge here of a digital modeling conversation rather than general, tone improvement. And, what are the last couple of things you would recommend to somebody if you wanted them to get better, at creating a good tone?
I mean, we've covered a lot of it. The things that I've got left now, I think, are really, personal preference things. So, and I know you've done some of this. So experiment with your pick thickness.
Yeah.
From a comfort and playability and speed perspective, it can make a difference. But also it can have an effect on the tone as well. That thicker, heavier pick will produce a different type of sound. I mean, I love using very thin, very light picks on an acoustic. Just the way that plastic, being much thinner, strums across an acoustic guitar string for open chords, or even kind of some lead work, it just works for me. I would never use personally a heavier pick on an acoustic. I know plenty of people do, but for me, there's something inherent about the sound on an acoustic guitar when I use a very thin pick. Whereas on an electric, obviously I'm going to use something much heavier. For me, that works and it gives me that control and that tone that I need. Control is probably the main thing. If I'm using a pick that's too thin on an electric, there's that flex which creates that inability to string skip and or even runs on the same string. It doesn't give me the tone and sound that I want using a thinner pick. So very cheap, not even a mod really. It's like the string thing, isn't it? The string gauge thing. It's just like play with different picks and you will get a different sound for sure. Whether it's one you like or not, that's up to you.
Yeah, I completely agree. Definitely something, if you're listening and you've never really experimented with pick, size, shape, material, width, all those different things, go and do it. You'd be surprised. I've been playing guitar for 27 years, and literally within the last 12 months I've had revelations in my guitar playing comfort and sound from just changing to a particular pick type, something I'd never done before. It used to be the pick I used would be the one that was in my pocket at the time I need to be playing guitar. Have I got a pick? Yeah, that's what I'm using. Exactly. It might be like a Fender celluloid thing, or it'd be like a Tortex 1mm thing. That's my pick. Whereas now it can be a valid method to change your tone to something else. A different material will sound different to another thing. Tortex will sound different to what's the material you can get for nuts? Because you can bone. Well, bone, but like an alternative bone, like a non-bone alternative to bone.
Do you mean plastic? You can get like Graphtec stuff. You can get like I'm messing with you. Sorry, man.
I never thought I'd ever say the words a non-bone alternative to bone. That's not a nice thing for a northerner to say. But anyway,
I loved hearing it, mate. That's why I just loved it. I love hearing you say bone in a northern accent. It sounds great. Bone.
But anyway, I tried some Graphtec picks last year, and I was just surprised to hear how bright it made my guitar sound. I mean, I was literally going from one pick to another, and like, it sounds like a different guitar. I've just changed the pick. This is something I've never known in my life as a guitarist. How is this possible?
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's
crazy.
It's incredible.
We get so wedded as guitar players to know that's my pick.
Yeah.
It's that color, it's that brand, and cool. And because a lot of that is based on comfort, right? I bought like a bag of 200 picks off wish.com because there were like 3, because, you know, I have these stupid moments where I do stuff like that. And it was like £3 or something like for 200 of these guitar picks in my thickness, my preferred thickness, which in I don't know, something like 0.96 or something it is, right? So just under 1 mil. So great. They've all turned up. They're all really nicely shaped. They're all really nicely finished around the edges. They are made of a material that I cannot get on with. They are like the one thing that you need a pick to do is not be like slippery. These things have got no surface friction at all.
Really? They're
like,
just too slippery.
Like then it's almost like they're deliberately slippery, right? So like celluloid guitar picks, yes, they're high gloss and they're shiny, but they have some frictional kind of resistance when you put them between your thumb and forefinger. And the Tortex ones are lovely because they are inherently designed to have that natural bit of grip. These ones, I just struggle just trying to keep hold of them in my hand. They're just so slippery. I've done a few gigs with them because, you know, I'm tight and I'm like, I've just bought 200 of these bastards. I've got to use them. But you know, never have I been more grateful for that little rubber strip on my mic stand where I can put picks in. Because the amount of times I've literally just been playing a song and it's just flown out of my hand and I've been like, right, I need another one of those. But I think I just need to just stop being tight and
I love your stubbornness that you've like, I bought 200 of these picks, 200 of these picks off from some Far Eastern manufacturing facility that basically they probably just stamped them out of some old random bit of plastic.
Some leftover Teflon.
I will absolutely make them work. And you're going through 60 of them in a gig.
I can't hold them in my hands. I'm concentrating more on trying to keep hold of my pick than playing. So yeah, they're going to have to go in the bin, and I might just have to spend like $10 on some Tortex ones and only have like 10 of them.
Well, I spent like nearly a tenner on, I think it was like a pack of 5 of these like Jim Dunlop jazz tone ones, which I've fallen in love with completely.
Have they got the little dimpled dishy?
No, not those. They're almost like a very old style kind of just black thing. But you see how thick they are. But they're very smooth, lovely material, really great grip on them. There's no kind of like you know, the thing you've mentioned. There's no kind of nothing on there for me to grip, but the material is grippy enough naturally. But the fact that they cost as much as they did means like I know where they all are at any point in time.
You're not throwing those on the pub floor after
no way. No, absolutely.
I'm deliberately trying to lose my 200.
Exactly.
People at the end of the night when we're doing a clear up, we're going, oh yeah, no mate, look, I found all these pics of yours on the floor. Like, no, you didn't.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're gone. They're dead to me. Anyway.
So what? I mean, one last thing that I see on the list: strap height.
Oh man, this is a silly one, right? This is a really
because I know you grew up being a Slash fan, so I'm assuming
this is it.
You're used to having your Les Paul like down by the knee kind of thing.
As an extension of my crotch, basically. Yeah. In true 80s rock star God fashion, if it doesn't look like it's coming out from your nether regions, then what is its purpose in life, right?
Yeah. So whereas I'm going the other way now. I'm going the other way, which is I'm becoming more like George Harrison in the Beatles. And that my guitar's an extension of my armpit, you know. Nice.
But do you know what, mate? I've reconciled this with myself, if only because I'm playing a Strat more and more in the bands that I'm playing in versus a Les Paul. To me, this may have been decades of growing up trying to emulate Slash's playing with a Les Paul that now, for me, a Les Paul slung a little bit lower, you know, it not only looks right, but that shouldn't really be the point, should it? But it feels right to me. A Les Paul, for some reason, just feels right, strung low for me, and then I'm able to kind of lift it up and position it in different ways when I need to get higher fret access, so it works. But playing a Strat at that same volume, doing some of the kind of function music that I was doing, I was just like, this, I am sacrificing how this looks and the fact that I think it doesn't look right having a guitar higher up for the playability now. And actually I'm playing Strats a lot higher now than I was, and forsaking the fact that it you know, it's not, I mean, I don't know, right? I don't know where this came from, but for some reason, you know, the cool kids had their guitars slung lower, but now held to that, having it raised higher makes it infinitely more playable. It's one less thing to worry about, and you know, I'm hitting less bum notes because I can access everything in the way that I need to, as I need to, rather than thinking, okay, now how do I access that because I'm standing up playing live versus sitting down and playing at home.
Yeah.
And so it's a really silly thing, but yeah, if you can, make sure you set your strap height in a way that's really comfortable to play, because you'll sound better.
Yeah, absolutely. See, this has kind of come full circle here, haven't we? Gone through this list and we've come full circle because we're talking about comfort, and that was the very first thing. Be comfortable with your instrument, have it set up properly, have it feeling good to play. And yeah, man, this is that Zen kind of thing again, isn't it? The guitar philosophy. So it's not just all about the equipment, but, you know, be comfortable. You know, you don't want to feel like you're fighting with your equipment. And the thing that you are holding and playing the most is your guitar. Be comfortable with it. That's going to give you all the freedom to improve your tone in other ways, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm sure my 17-year-old self would slap my middle-aged self now in the face for saying that I've raised my guitar strap up a few notches because it's more comfortable. But that's not the point. The comfortability is leading to a better tone and a better sound, and that's more important to me now than looking like a punk rock star. Because that would just look silly at the age of 40 anyway. So like, I would need to 40-year-old punk rock star.
Oh, awesome, dude. Well, I think we've hit the nail on the head there. I think that gives, if you're listening, then you're welcome. You've got lots to be getting on with there. Go and spend a little bit of money. Go and get your guitar set up, and yeah, I think that's it. I think we're providing a fantastic service.
Nice, mate. Nice. I'm really enjoyed that chat.
Me too.
Particularly the sillier moments. What are you up to next week? Anything exciting?
I think have I got a gig next week? Have you got a gig next week or the week after? It's the week after. It's the first full weekend of April. Yeah, I think.
Oh, I've got a gig that week as well.
Hang on a sec. Is it next week or is it? Yeah, it's next week.
Oh, you're next week?
Sunday, actually. Yeah, a week on Sunday. I've got a gig. Just
open gig or private gig?
Yeah, just a private gig.
Oh, okay.
So I'm looking forward to that. That's the first one for a little while. Looking forward to getting out about playing. I'm going to try and do a bit of practice this week, maybe. But I'm chilled. I'm relaxed at the moment. Just kind of...
You know your stuff.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. The gig I've got has got like keys and a couple of horns players on, so I might not even turn my volume
luxury.
up. I might just stand there and mime for the gig.
Well, actually, yeah, my next gig is with the DLB, Depping for Damien at the Square Brewery in Petersfield on that first weekend of April. And being the professional outfit that they are, I'm not the only guitarist on it by any stretch. So there's keys players, there's all sorts, mate. So it's down the road. It's with Damo. I will do my homework and learn his set list thoroughly, but in terms of pressure, no, it's going to be a good laugh. Is that an
open gig as well? Is it a public gig?
It is. It is a public gig.
Excellent.
Public gig indeed. There'll be a pint at the bar for you waiting, Sarah, if you fancy a night out.
Well, maybe I'll be there. Fantastic, bud. Well, on that note, have a cracking week.
Angie.
And I will speak to you on the next one.
Looking forward to it, buddy.
All right, take care. Adios. Thank you so much for joining us again this week on the Guitar Smarts podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. I know my guitar tone is going to benefit a lot from this conversation. How about yours? Come and tell us what your ideas are for improving guitar tone and for getting the most out of your sound. You can let us know on our social media pages over on Instagram and Facebook. And remember to check out the description for all those other links to places that are really, really important, like our Buy Me a Coffee page, our Etsy merchandise store, links where you can leave us a review. All those things, would be very gratefully received. Anyway, hope you have a fantastic week or two, and we will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.